Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this financial reporting and planning in Power BI. The objective today, though, basically is to cover kind of the basics of financial reporting and planning in Power BI, things you need to be aware of if you're getting into the space, how to create a model, how to actually do that budgeting and forecasting, and what write back in Power BI actually looks like. And write back in Power BI is something fairly unique to Acterys, and we'll show you some of that functionality. The rest of the content is also very relevant just from a more broad standpoint, particularly looking at some of the advances we've seen recently across the industry in general, but also with regards to Microsoft, the Fabric framework, and what that looks like. So basically how you can use existing tool sets to better optimize and model the information that you've got, and then how to be able to actually capture that and bring that into a forecasting and a planning cycle, potentially within the same interface. So I've been working with the Acterys team for 20 years now. The space is a little bit different 20 years ago, but the value proposition in terms of, what can I do from a planning perspective? How can I move away from Excel? Is something that's still very much prevalent and the case today. So I've always been a nerd from before when it was cool, a big interest in data, and what's been happening the last few years and the way that's been able to accelerate people's planning and budgeting processes is something that's very exciting and close to me. So what I'll do today, rather than kind of go through a whole bunch of slides and then come to a bit of a product pitch at the end, is I'll try and keep it a little more interesting and relevant. So within a few minutes, I'm going to show you some of the things you can do in Power BI to be able to plan and forecast and what that looks like. It might be a little bit disjointed, but I think it'll be more interesting to give you an idea of how these things actually work. And I'll continue to come back to the slides and talk about practically, rather more functionally and theoretically what that looks like, all the things that are important to consider when you're embarking on this journey. So one of the core points is often that companies often work in silos, particularly with traditional ERP systems. You might have other different planning systems, HR systems, additional accounting systems or planning systems across the organization. These are very often siloed and cut off from the various departments and teams. And Excel is a culprit here, but is also often used to try and solve these problems as a way of moving information between these tools, which is good it's doing, but obviously that then comes with its own difficulties in terms of audit trails, security, and basically causes more problems in the long run. In that same vein, cross-collaboration is often difficult because of these various teams, and also because of the way that Excel is used. And it means that we're using obsolete processes to handle large amounts and growing amounts of data. So overall, there's a big disconnect between the big data that we're using and the AI metrics and the real world actions. They're in very different places throughout the organization. Now, Power BI is really changing this. It's a place where you can bring information in from a whole bunch of local sources as well as broader sources and be able to carry out that analytics that you need to on the go. So that's something that's very useful from a Power BI perspective. And something that I encourage you to take a look at. It's got a huge amount of data sources that you can access, and you can bring these into one place. Once the data is in Power BI, it's then very easy with Acterys to be able to budget, forecast, and plan on top of this. So just going to kick off with optimizing and modeling financial reporting data. So what you need to do to be able to get this information into a place where you can plan against it. And then I'll pop over and show you what that planning looks like, so you've got an idea of the structure you need to get it into and why you need to get it into that structure. So as I mentioned, Power BI is probably the preeminent self-service analytics solution now. It's been around for approaching a decade. It came off the back of Microsoft Analysis Services, and it really is bringing together very powerful data analytics options with user-friendly interfaces. If you're very familiar with Excel and you haven't yet played with Power BI, the screens initially look a little bit confronting and different, but once you start playing around with the interface, it's very easy to see and understand how you can build out your models. And then, of course, you've got the additional power of the programming language within it, DAX, which again came from Analysis Services, to be able to conduct more advanced analysis, produce calculations, all of which are then centralized in one location. And you can build these data models out for the organization without needing to worry about what that looks like from users doing it in Excel and having the ability to create their own formulas and functions, which are not necessarily up to the standard or subject to first insertion control. Some of the great things you'll get is the visualization options, and you'll see out of the box, there's a huge amount of visualizations available there that you're able to access immediately. It's also got a marketplace for visualizations. And this means you can access thousands and thousands of visualizations built by third parties that enable you to carry out more specific tasks. You don't need to download macros or install macros. You can go out to the marketplace and find what someone else is doing, install that visual into your organization. There's Microsoft certified visualizations, so you can understand and know that all of the data and information is being kept within Power BI and it's secure. And it's a great way to expand that functionality without having to build things out yourself. It's kind of like an app store, I guess, for visuals that you have access to. The data protection security features are obviously much better. It's integrated with Active Directory directly, so you can use that same platform for security and also for version control. And you've got lots of options for the way you can configure who has access to which bits of data. It's called row-level security in Power BI. And it basically means you can restrict organizational groups or users to specific subsets of information within the platform while still giving them access to the full bunch of reporting. And the integration into the Microsoft ecosystem is also extremely good and tight. You can even embed Power BI reports directly into Teams and PowerPoint. In a PowerPoint presentation, you can be looking at live data. And with Acterys, you can actually be budgeting and forecasting within the slide that you're presenting on a PowerPoint slide. So the integration is extremely tight. At this point, I'm just going to switch over and quickly show you a little bit of Power BI with a little bit of Acterys inside it. So the first thing that you'll note is I'm accessing this page just through a browser, and I'm accessing the Power BI web service. This is extremely compatible cross-platform, so I'm using a Windows machine right now, but it works across Mac OS, Linux, and most browsers with full support for the reporting suite. It also supports tablets and mobiles, and you can optimize the views for them specifically. And Acterys has the same level of support and compatibility that Power BI has. So you can build these reports for users in the organization to access on any device, on any platform, more or less, and be able to capture their input wherever they are within the same structure that's been defined, within the same security rules that have been defined, and with the same audit trail and logging that has been defined. So much more control than you would have over organizational information that may be getting distributed elsewhere. Whilst it is distributed in browser, we can also go full screen and effectively give you that kind of interface that a user might expect to have, utilizing all of the space that's available. And one thing to bear in mind is Power BI is essentially a blank canvas. So in this case, this report has been built with a bunch of standard Power BI functions and Power BI matrices that show cards here with information, that show charts here with variances, and buttons down the axis on the left. And this could look like anything. You could have any combination of visuals. You could have whatever menu structure you like. You could have whatever interactions you like. And I'll show you something slightly different later so you can get an idea of the flexibility. But important to bear in mind that with Power BI, you have complete control over the interface, over the user journey, and over the design of the reports. There are very few limitations. What you'll notice on this report is we put together basically a pretty simple demo where we're budgeting or planning by quantity, by unit price, and producing the revenues. All of this calculation logic just sits in Power BI and in Microsoft. So if your organization has those skill sets, you can build and maintain these models yourself. There's no kind of Acterys language here. Whatever you're doing in Power BI, whatever you're looking to do in Power BI, you can continue to do that. You can continue to leverage those resources and just use the Acterys matrices to capture the information. It's effectively all we're doing here. So on that note, on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll note these 3 input matrices. In this case, we've stacked down the vertical axis, the products, and across the horizontal axis, we have period. But again, depending on the structure of your data, it's completely up to you what that looks like here. So bearing that in mind, in this case, using our web browser, we have the ability to click this edit button. And then when I click this edit button, I can come in here and I can actually change any of these numbers. So I might want to change this from 12 to 20. I might want to increase this number by 50%, putting in I 50%. I might want to come over here to the end of the year or towards the end of December 2023 and say for the remaining periods, I want the number to be 9. So I prefix it with an R to the right. And you can see all of these numbers have been changed here in this visual. Now, at this point in time, they've just been saved in the visual. But when I click the save button, what it's actually doing is writing back to an Azure SQL database and changing that number for this scenario, for this location, for this product, for this period. And then once that's saved, it will refresh all of the visuals on the page. You can see here they're currently in progress. You'll notice over here, this graph will change slightly from some of the changes that I've made, this variance graph, which is comparing budget to actuals. And I've just made a change to the budget there. So you're not adjusting any information that sits in a source system. We're connecting directly to the source systems, and we're using either existing ETL pipelines that you've got or Acterys connectors, and we'll touch more on this when I get back to the slides, to be able to pull the information into Power BI via an Azure SQL database. Now, any of the changes that the users make here are logged in this SQL database. They have the security processes that apply to the SQL database, but it's not changing the source system. Instead, you've got this additional database, which is now available across whatever Power BI models and data sets you have to be able to capture user input. And we'll come back later and talk about what that looks like in terms of security and scenario management. But the key thing, the key takeaway here is we give you some tools that let you capture these values from within Power BI. And you can obviously understand how important that is to the planning process, and also why it's important to build the appropriate model out and to understand what data you want to capture, so you can bring that into Power BI. So that was just a quick overview to get you thinking about kind of what it looks like from a technical standpoint. We'll now talk a little bit about how you need to actually think about your data and plan your data to be able to use Acterys effectively, or any other kind of planning process. Even if you're carrying that out in Excel or in other tools, it's very important that you build the right data model to be able to use it for the initial planning, but also for variance analysis. And also when you want to move forward and adapt that model and maybe go from more direct entry from a P&L perspective to adopting driver-based planning. A very simple example like we just saw, using price and quantity to drive revenue. We could bring in cost there as well, and we could start to actually derive the P&L, the cash flow, and the balance sheet by using the information that's brought in. But to do that, we need to have a well-designed data model. That will lead to optimal performance, to more accurate reports, and importantly, like I said, the structure of how you actually plan going forward, and making sure that you're thinking about the way that you want to approach it. You can always start simple and add additional models and methods later. Often you might start just by budgeting directly to your P&L, so having your chart accounts down one axis, and then later you might start to adopt more driver-based planning, where various different models that you build feed into the P&L, to the GL and the P&L at the appropriate account level, and then build those derivation modes. So a very common choice, and in our opinion, the way to go is with a well-designed star schema model. And that effectively is where you break down the various attributes to which you want to plan with. So it could be products, it could be organizations, it would be your chart of accounts, it could be employees, it could be an asset register. Whatever that structure is, you want to be able to bring that in to Acterys. And again, you can do that by using any existing ETL pipelines you've got. You can use the Acterys modeler to connect to SQL databases, CSV files, Excel, SharePoint, even an existing Power BI data set. So if you've already done some heavy lifting to get the data that you need into Power BI, you can use that as a data set initially to configure Acterys to bring in the star schema model and the dimensions that you want to plan against. So we do have within Acterys some one-click connections, and I'll just show you some of them quickly. Once I sign back in. So the Acterys Modeler is the administrative tool that's typically used by the business admins or the IT administrators. And it's used when you create new users, when you update your licensing, but also importantly, when you bring in new data sources. So I just want to show you quickly what that looks like, just to give you an idea of kind of end-to-end the various aspects of the platform that you're looking at. I'll just carry out my MFA. All right, so we won't worry too much about everything that's here. I just want to give you a brief overview so you kind of, again, understand all of the components. Acterys really is quite a simple product. There's a lot of complex things that go on under the hood to be able to capture the data correctly, the audit trails, the security layers. But from a user standpoint, from a product standpoint, it's really quite simple. To that end, we offer a 2-week free trial. So if you're interested in checking out Acterys yourself, just get in touch with me. I'll put a link to my meeting invite tool in the calendar, in the Teams chat shortly, in the GoToMeeting chat shortly. Book a time with me. We can talk through requirements and set you up to actually build a demo yourself, build a trial yourself, basically on the demo data that you have, or on real data that you have, or anonymous data that you have. So here's an example of creating a new connection. So you can see here, all of these coming soons are actually available now. I'm just logged into a demo account. With all of these tools, we have very easy options to connect. So you basically click to connect, go to the other system, authorize Acterys to be able to access it, and it will automatically create that star schema for you from the data that you have there. So a very quick way to be up and running. Otherwise, if it's a little bit more complex or not one of those tools, we can connect to SQL, Excel, SharePoint, OneDrive, so a range of different options. The key point is getting your data in that right structure. So it's not just the connection, but making sure you've got that data model correct. So that was just a quick look at our one-click options, a few extra clicks, but it really is very simple. Normally within a few minutes, as long as you set the permissions up, you'll actually have that model there in Acterys and be able to start configuring your visuals to be able to capture that user input against the structure that you've already got, which really does make it much easier to have this one version of the truth, because in Power BI, you'll already have your existing data sets, your existing information coming through from the various tools you're using, and then Acterys is just added as another data source there, but that data source is using the same structure. It's connected to your existing models to pull that structure through. It's purely used as the place to actually capture the information that end users are entering. Also through the modeler, you have the ability to set up some basic time intelligence. I won't go through it now, but you can create automatic time intelligence with calendar management. You can create FX handling, so you can automatically get FX rates from a number of different sources that we offer the ability to connect to, or you can connect them to your own rates, or you can create entry tools to be able to modify the rates yourself. So for example, you want to have different FX rates for different organizations or for different types of reporting, various organizations, you can set that all up within Acterys, and you can also set up workflows as well, which I'll touch on a little bit later. That's a quick overview of kind of the modeling and where you need to create it. Again, the takeaway is there's a couple of tools that we've got to make that initial connection very easy. You want to make sure you have the right structure and bear in mind what you want that to look like going forward. And then you can use the modeler for most of the basic tasks initially. So creating that structure, creating hierarchies, creating time intelligence, and likewise for multi-currency and other types of consolidation. You can carry out that structure there as well. So just some quick stats or issues to look at with regards to manual report generation. Everyone I speak to, at least from the sales perspective, and 72% of finance teams, according to the study we're looking at, spend up to 10 hours a week on non-value add related tasks that could be automated. So a lot of that is generating different reports for different business centers, updating them when changes have been made. There's obviously a big risk of human error here. but also it's just ineffective use of people's time. That time could be spent analyzing data or creating processes for the capturing of data in the planning process, rather than carrying out these reporting frameworks. So with you working towards what you've got in Power BI, and if you've got existing data sets that you want to bring in, definitely a good place to start. Obviously, in that case at the moment, all the requesting of updates is over email, over Teams, or over phone. I'll show you a little bit later what the workflow process looks like. But again, very strong integration with the Microsoft suite here. And we can actually integrate with flows in Power Automate, which is extremely customizable. You can have email notifications going to N of M people. You can have automatic chains of approvals that go through to managers and managed managers. You can set versions to be accessible, to be viewed by the organization when they're approved. You can tie that to permissions. You can also capture commentary at any interval. So you might want to capture those comments down to cellular level. So for a particular account, particular month, particular organization. Or you might want to only capture those workflows at a high level. Could just be per scenario, per organization, per year. And all of that structure is also very easy to build. Then once it's built, it's all in one place in a SQL database. You can report on it throughout Power BI and anywhere else. And it's all audited as well. So it's very easy to understand when a scenario is moved from one piece of workflow to another. An important other thing to bear in mind is just the automatic data refresh. So everything that's happening with Acterys is in real time. Anyone else across the organization who was viewing those reports, pending permissions and pending the workflows you've got in place, so if they're accessible, will see those updates immediately, and we'll see the results of those calculations immediately. So on the demo I showed you briefly before, we had revenue, which was price times quantity. You can have much more complex calculations, and all of these complex calculations are calculated in real time as a result of what's been entered by the end user. We can also set up the data refresh depending on your existing data source and where it's coming from. These can be scheduled to occur at a regular point in time, or they can occur when underlying data changes. So again, it's just a case of looking at your ETL pipelines, looking at what tools you're currently using, and working out where it makes sense to include Acterys in that. If you do have ETL pipelines, they almost certainly have very easy ways of interacting with Microsoft SQL Server. And at the bottom of it, that's all that Acterys data structure really is. All right, advanced budgeting and forecasting. So the problems that we've got at the moment are, again, time-consuming, manual processes leading to errors, people updating Excel sheets, data sheets not consolidating, version control that relies on human interaction, the data that's scattered across existing and different systems, making it difficult to analyze in real time. Often we'll see users who are using a particular budgeting and planning tool, and they're carrying that out, say, once a year or maybe slightly more regularly, but any changes made to that tool take a day or longer to be updated into their reporting framework and the reporting system. And that's at the core of Acterys' design architecture. Acterys was actually initially developed off the back of feedback coming from organizations using other planning tools, that they didn't like the fact that planning happened in one place and all the analysis and ongoing comparisons carried out elsewhere. And that's why our team looked at Power BI at the time. It was very fresh, decided it was a great place to be able to plan and budget, and actually built Acterys with that design principle in mind. So it's putting the planning and budgeting where the information is and where the users are, rather than putting it somewhere else and having to rely on an import-export process on a regular basis to be able to move information between these various systems. And as Power BI has moved to over 100,000 customers, it's certainly gone from strength to strength. It's getting easier and easier for organizations to consolidate. It just makes sense for Acterys to be there in that same place. Complex financial models and significant resources and expertise is also a really big one. Because we're just using the Microsoft framework, all of the calculation logic sits in Microsoft tools. It sits in Microsoft SQL Server and it sits in Microsoft Power BI. So if you have those skill sets internally, you can use those same resources to be able to carry out this logic. If you don't, they're very easy to find and maintain. And also it's a great skill set to have. So it's a great tool for you or for your finance department or for your teams to actually get a bit more experience with Power BI, realize what can be done with it, and actually build up that expertise and own the financial models yourself, rather than relying on IT or external contractors to be able to go out there and make changes to these models. Because we're relying on these same existing tool sets that are very mature, it also means that there is virtually nothing you can't do in Acterys, because it's just been done in SQL Server and Power BI. Now, obviously, you want to do it the most effective way possible, and there's some things to keep in mind which we can help you with. But the point is, whatever the models you wish to develop, you can find the resources, if you don't have them, to do them for you, and the wealth of information that's available online to be able to help build out these tools is astounding. Also, recently, with Microsoft Copilot, we're seeing the ability to be able to build models within Power BI using AI, and that's only going to continue to get stronger and stronger. As long as you can define what you want these models to do and how they're going to do it, it'll be easier and easier to get access to that code and to maintain that code with yourself and within your organization. A few other quick points: struggling to adapt to changing market conditions. Power BI has a 1-month release cycle. It's going from strength to strength. You would have seen some things again with Copilot recently. You can now talk to it and ask it to build reports. It will design those reports for you with the elements on the page, and you can then iterate with those reports. Acterys has that same integration, so shortly you'll be able to actually just talk to Acterys to be able to get it to create new scenarios for you, to seed those scenarios. All things which I'll show you today, which are fairly easy to do from an end user perspective, are getting even easier with the help of AI. Visibility for tracking progress and identifying areas is another key one as well, which I'll show you shortly. So I'm just going to switch back and show you a little bit more of the demo model, and then we'll come back to some of the more advanced ways you can plan and some of the other things to keep in consideration. So if I just jump back into full mode here, full screen mode. So before I showed you how I could change the Acterys matrix to change numbers that exist at a financial intersection. Any financial number or any number financial that exists at an intersection can be changed with this tool. The top one was quantity. Beneath here, we've got units price. So it's formatted a bit differently, but it's exactly the same functionality. I can enter whole numbers. I can increase by percentage points. I can fill through to the right. And you'll notice here then when I save this that the numbers down here will change slightly. The graph where I'm comparing budgets to actuals will change slightly. So the Acterys matrix is the one visual I've shown you so far. It's at the core of the Acterys product set. It's very similar in look and feel to the Power BI matrix, with a very important difference: you can write back, and that write back is audited, and that write back has permissions that are applied to it as to whether or not various users or groups can A, read it, and B, write back to it. So one other useful piece of functionality here, where I'm planning right now, say budget against actuals, it's all well and good. But for example, I may want to actually take a new scenario, create a new scenario to budget against. So in this case, I can come over here. Again, this is just an interface that's been built around these visuals. Whatever this looks like, or this workflow looks like, it's completely customizable. But I can click on Scenario Edit, and what will show up here in an overlay to this Power BI report is a table edit visual. In this case, the table is very simple. This is the Acterys table edit visual. The table is just a list of the scenarios that exist. I can click on the plus button, and I can create a new scenario called webinar. And when I save that, again, that's writing back to a table on the SQL database because I have the right permissions, and creating this new row, which I called webinar. Now that's just creating a new row that doesn't actually have any information or data within it. So if I come back to the report, if I click refresh to update the data, I'll then be able to see the new scenario that I've created over here on the left-hand side in these standard Power BI visuals. If I now select webinar, visuals will update, and I'll see the information that exists in the webinar scenario. Now, because I've just created this scenario, there's going to be no information. Now, I'm not going to have any unit price, any quantity, and therefore any revenues, and I'll see some pretty big variance because it's comparing it here to the actual scenario. What I can do then is go back into my scenario edit screen, and I can actually choose to copy data between scenarios. And this is something that is handled by the Acterys visual number 3, the copy visual. So here I can say for this particular model, which is the cube, you don't have to really worry about that, but you can configure this in the modeler. As an end user with the appropriate permission set, I want to go and I want to get everything that sits in the scenario, let's say budget, or let's say actuals, and I want to copy that to webinar. Now again, permissions pending, what that's doing is going to the model and getting all the information that's sat, in this case, in this one model, but this could be different drivers, it could be different modules, it could be a whole bunch of data that's feeding through the actuals, or feeding through the forecast, or the actuals, and I can actually copy that and feed it across. So now what that's done is copied all the information through into the webinar scenario. So now I can come back to the report, I can refresh it, and we'll be able to see that updated data. If I copied correctly, which I think I did. So it's saying no variance, which is good because I've just copied it across. And here we're seeing the quantity, which I've copied across into this product set. So I've just copied the quantity in this case, but you can see here the way that's been copied through. If I wanted to come back to scenario edit, I could actually choose to copy a different segment of data as well. So I could choose, once the cube is loaded, I could choose to copy a scenario, for example, or I could do it just for a particular product, or I could do it for, in this case, a particular period. So I could say, I want to go and copy the scenario again. Let's copy from budget to webinar. And I could add a condition to do it for a specific intersection if I wanted to. So I could say, look, let's just copy one product or one product group or one stock color through into webinar. In this way, you can give users a very flexible tool to be able to move data around themselves, again, pending permission. So typically when a new scenario is created, only I would have the ability to be able to see webinar. You typically integrate some kind of workflows so that other users could then see it once it was approved and once it was available across the organization. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. One more thing I want to show you around the table edit visual, just to give it a different context, is how to use it, for example, to edit any other dimension that exists. So right now I did a table edit visual and I used it for scenario, but I could use it for the product dimension, or I could use it for the period dimension. And to show you that, I'm just going to switch across to a broader demo environment. So I'm going back to my browser, I'm going back to the Power BI web service. And this is a more full-featured kind of demo to give you an idea of all of the aspects. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but I'll show you some of the different screens so you can get an idea for how you might actually use Acterys visuals to be able to capture information in a different kind of framework. One that I'm going to show you now is for employees. So for example, you may be currently capturing your employee information from an HR system. You might have planning and budgeting information where you're capturing it in Excel sheets. But what you can do is, depending on the model you've got, you can configure that data collection here in Acterys. So right now, this is the matrix visual I've shown you. So this is if I was just entering by the employee by month. What you could do, depending on the way you structure your data, is capture that in an employee management table. So all you would do then within Acterys is link your existing source system to an employee table and bring that in, and then have the relevant fields that you want to be able to capture. So in this case, this is a fairly standard employee detail field. We've got titles, which are free text. We've got calendar months, which can be dates, which can be selected from a calendar dropdown. We've got numerical inputs. We've got drop-down validated lists. So you can use these kind of visuals to capture any information in Power BI. It doesn't need to be just for planning or budgeting purposes. We've got organizations that are using this as a recruitment tool. We've got organizations who are using this to be able to capture information from field specialists, who are using operators in the field, who are using tablets and mobiles. So whilst the topic today is on using Acterys for a financial reporting and budgeting and forecasting standpoint, bear in mind that with where Power BI is now and where it's going, you can take what's currently just a platform for consuming and analyzing information and actually capture that feedback from end users, whether it's something like planning per employee, planning per CapEx register, whether it's capturing commentary or commentary around the organization in terms of planning cycles, in terms of feedback mechanisms. All of it's captured, all of it's logged, and all of it has a security mechanism available. So there's one example of using the table edit visual. Before it was just scenario and just one column. Here's employee with a range of columns. All right. So that takes me back to where I was here in terms of integrating data from virtually any source, but also being able to then capture that data in any kind of format and to see what can actually occur off the back of it. So in that case, it was revenue is quantity times unit prices. Whatever rules you want to have there, you can build in to Power BI and build into SQL Server. And when users enter the numbers, either in the table edit visual or the Acterys matrix, they'll be able to capture that input and see the output in real time across the model. And depending on your workflows, be able to share that and have that visible to other users within the organization. So it really is, as it says here, unparalleled agility and right back and modeling, right? You can create one of these matrix visuals, very simple, or the table edit visual within your organization. As long as you've got the data structure behind it, within a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes, you can distribute a report, have it available within the organization, and be able to capture that information. It's not going to an Excel sheet, it's not going to a Word doc, it's not going to a SharePoint folder. It's going into a database where it's audited and where a security mechanism exists, and where calculations can actually occur in real time off the back of it. Like it says here, be able to answer the following very quickly. What happens when I do this? And then what is the result? See what that looks like. So rounds us out to implementing right back in Power BI. I've shown you now a couple of ways of how it can be done and what can be done. But to circle back to why you want to do it that way, in traditional planning process, you don't really have full access to all the additional information. It's very hard to change your model and to plan differently. If you want to build a new model and quickly work out how you're going to drive through a particular account on the P&L, you can do that very easily. You can update your model. You can see the what-if analysis results in real time, and you can distribute that to your users. It's also far easier to incorporate other data sources. If you've got them there in Power BI now, they're basically there already. And that data entry is going straight to SQL Server. It's not going through other hoops and loops beforehand where users or even automatic processes need to bring it back in on a scheduled timing. So Power BI Write Back lets you to directly edit that data directly from Power BI. And as I showed you, a table edit visual, a matrix visual, a copy visual, mobile, tablet, browser, wherever it is, you can capture that right back. Make the change to the data sets immediately. It's not changing your source system. It's becoming an additional data set that sits within your repository that you can then use to reference, that the whole organization can reference pending permissions. So you can keep this as your SQL database there. You can capture the various user inputs, and then you can provide access across the organization. Anything else that interacts with SQL Server, like Power Automate for the flows, for example, is automatically tied into the process. It's very accessible. Again, it just comes down to design and permissions. One thing I haven't touched on is the Excel integration. So basically everything that I've showed you today, you can also do in Excel. It's very much like some of the, I guess, more legacy business intelligence tools that you would have seen. You can do the equivalent of the matrix edit, which is a Power Pivot edit. So you can edit pivot tables and write back directly. You can do the equivalent of the dimension, the table edit visual by creating a worksheet that is linked to a dimension. So it's still using Excel as that reporting tool and also as like a window into the data. So it's not actually storing any of the data. Excel connects to the data set, and all of the logic and the rule sets and the permissions layers are brought straight through. But then Excel can then also write back to the same data set, again, through editing pivot tables, through editing formula views, and through dimension edits. Again, the structure is important, but the Acterys engine will generate it immediately and optimally as long as you have that structure in there. So if your data is clean, then it's much easier for you to be able to create that structure and to link it through to it. Acterys will do it quite quickly. It just needs to be in a healthy state, and we can help you assess that and work out what changes you need to make. Like I said, there is a trial, and with the trial, you can get whatever structure you want up and running. You'll be able to do the basic stuff. It just comes down to thinking further forward, thinking how you want to plan, what structure you want to have, and what that looks like. So I have touched on a couple of core examples today in the two demos that I have shown you, but here's some examples of how people are using Acterys. So I think a lot of the financial ones are quite obvious: the cash flow planning, SaaS planning, franchise planning, sales planning I took you through, student enrollment planning, I think I mentioned before. So basically anything where you're capturing input, whether it's from customers, whether it's from employees, whether it's from partners or vendors. We've got some great examples of vendor management planning, where the vendors then actually have access to the Power BI reports and come in there and create their own forecasts and provide their own commentary, which of course then goes through a workflow and approval process. But there's lots of examples now taking this outside just the direct finance team, the rest of the organization, but further outside the organization to other stakeholders that are involved in these processes. It can be a very easy way to build a tool that is collecting information in a secure, auditable, managed framework. So because our tool is so flexible, we don't really have a sweet spot in terms of organizational type or region. Pretty much every industry and every region we have a lot of exposure in. We're founded in Australia, so we have a bit of a bias towards Asia Pac initially. In the US, we've had a heavy presence the last 5 or 6 years. In the DACH region, again, we also have roots there and have a strong customer base. And across Europe and the broader EMEA, we're expanding as well. So if there's something that you're looking at doing, we will have a customer who's done it. We can certainly take you through that, explain it to you, and if relevant at the appropriate moment in time, you can speak to one of our customers doing what it is that you need done. So our tagline is plan to succeed. And again, it's quite basic, but essentially we're ensuring you can plan your achievement across all organization functions in the quickest, smartest, easier way. So finance, sales, HR, marketing, whatever kind of the industry. We just want to take that existing function that you have, ideally with an existing Power BI data set and processes, and give you the tools to be able to capture that input, to be able to take a few different stages out of the process and just really simplify it into the one place where it's audited and where it's secured. So effectively empowering your teams throughout your organization to take control of their own planning process, rather than being restricted and guided by what tools can or can't do. We're really trying to remove any of the limitations by not having our own custom core, not having our own framework, but just relying on everything that can be done in the Microsoft suite. Power BI is incredible. SQL Server is very, very mature. And the rest of the Microsoft suite is as well. So we just provide that missing gap in being able to actually capture that input and use the rest of the tool set, rather than reinventing the wheel and building our own reporting layer, our own analytics layer. We've just identified this gap and filled it. So I think I covered the problem pretty thoroughly at the start, but just to focus back also on this missing functionality. So just because you can capture the write back doesn't necessarily mean you've got everything you need. So you've got ability to be able to splash from the top down to the bottom up. We can lock individual rows. We can provide formatting and validation on cells. There's a couple of things I'll show you in a second that provide that next level of functionality. It's not just capturing a number or capturing a row. But as I said before, moving all your sources into one place, bringing them together, removing the need for siloed solutions, and having something that you can maintain and build yourself. And to wrap that up, it is the aggregate the data using our connectors or your ETL pipeline, optimize, get into that star schema I was talking about. Make sure you've got all the information you want there for how you're planning and how you're going to plan, and then plan. So the last slide I'll show you is on the actual architecture, everything I've shown. So this should bring it together and hopefully wrap it around. Normally the demo would be more towards the end, but I think it's better to kind of show you as we move along, get you thinking and understanding kind of what it looks like. Again, any other questions, reach out to me directly and we can take you through them. So initially you start with what you've got on the left, and you've probably got a few of these already. We've got the connectors, which can then connect directly, or you use the existing ETL pipeline. So this is databases, applications, events, files, functions. Then this is all comes across into the middle, into the Acterys layer. And this is where the star schema bit's important. This is where you use the modeler to bring the information in. This is where you can use Power BI Sync, which brings the data from Power BI if you've already got it, and it brings it into this analysis-ready SQL schema. Then on the right-hand side, we use Power BI through browser as well. There is an API available, so if you want to actually integrate directly with the API with other systems you've got to be able to provide right back, that's fully supported, and using the Excel front end as well. So that gives you the reports, the dashboards, the modeling, and basically the ability to plan and forecast. This is kind of just a graphical representation of how you get all of the information you've currently got brought into the SQL database, and then with the reporting layers on top of it. And one thing to bear in mind is this process typically takes days, not months. So you can be up and running on a trial in 10, 15 minutes. It'll take you a little while to be able to then bring in the data structure you want, to configure the visuals, but it's really very simple. You know, it's not a several month process. It really is a case of days. So if you are interested and if you have a use case, I encourage you to reach out. I'm just going to flip back and show you another little few bits and pieces over here in the visual. So I mentioned before, you've got the ability to do top-down, bottom-up blocking and validation. What I mean by that is, for example, I can change this number on the top here, this engineering total, and if I change this number, this 426,851, it would take the new entry I basically configure, and it would fill it down underneath in the same proportion. So it will maintain and respect the existing proportions as you change these numbers. One other thing you can do here, and this is not rendering quite so nicely, but we've got the ability to do, here we go, splashing like. What this means is, in this case, I'm writing a number back to scenario, measures, employees, dates. I can actually write the number back with the allocation of a different number. So what that means is I could phase it like last year. I could phase it like a different scenario. I could phase it like a different product. There's a whole bunch of different options you've got here. I can constraint plans. So I could lock rows and columns if I know one employee is not going to change, if I know particular months have been locked and not going to change. We've got comment functionality. Again, we can comment at the cell level, we can comment at the top level, and we can also paste directly from Excel. So there's a lot of different functionality you've got in terms of, yeah, you can write back, but how can you configure how that input is taken? And everything, again, that I've shown you so far is functionality that's available out of the box. But because Acterys is built in SQL Server, all of this can be customized from a development perspective. So, you know, if it's, the question is, can I do X in this system? If it can be done in SQL Server, then it can be built to have that logic. You don't want to have custom logic for how numbers are broken down using different phasing or locked in certain periods. Whatever it is, if it can be done programmatically, you can create that structure and you can have it here. One other thing I wanted to probably start to wrap up on, I mentioned a couple of times before, is workflow management. And again, one of the benefits of Acterys is this is incredibly flexible. You can choose what that workflow looks like. So in this case, a workflow is defined as a scenario and an organization and then a status. This is just our table edit visual. This is just another table that I created, where I defined these rows. So you can define what extra columns you want, if they're linked to existing tables, if they're linked to other existing tables. So in this case, Tim scenario in this table is linked to scenario and organization is linked to AdventureWorks. What that means is I've now created a structure where for every scenario in every organization, there is a status. And that status can be changed from a drop-down list. And there is a comment. Now, what happens when I save that it depends on what you want to configure. But by default, what it will do is when the status is changed to submitted or to approved, then it's not available for writing to the user that owns it. If it's in progress or not started, then it is available for writing to the user. If it's approved, then it's not available for writing, and it's available for reading to the rest of the organization. But whatever structure you want to build in there, if there's different manager approvals, if there's a different hierarchy, if it's visible to different groups, you can create all of that. And you can have multiple workflows. So in this case, this workflow is per scenario per organization. We might want to have additional scenarios for the HR model, where every employee manager has access to a workflow. Or you might want to have a different one for sales planning. You're not limited to any kind of core structure or way it works. Capturing workflow management or capturing comments can also be done on any structure that you define, just using these visuals that I've shown you already. So very flexible and very easy. It just comes down to definition and what you want to link that to and what that ties to in your existing system. All right, I think that's it from my end. And there's one question that says reconnect to the data source. Not sure what that relates to. So you can connect to the data source from within the modeler, and then the data will refresh depending on the cadence that you define. So typically that would be once a day, but it could be more often. And you also have the ability to be able to kick them off manually. So for example, at end of month, or if it's during a budgeting process, and you want to actually kick off a refresh because some changes have been made, you can do that immediately. The Acterys data source is always in direct query mode, which means when anything is changed, it's always going to be visible to the users immediately. In terms of that connection from Acterys to the data source itself, if that was the question, then yeah, the cadence of that refresh is definable. And like I mentioned before, it can either be on a scheduled basis or it can be triggered. So we can actually set up triggers in SQL Server or other data sources that observe when changes occur. And when changes occur, they're actually then kicks off and runs the process. One little other piece I'm going to show you while we're here. This is the Acterys variance matrix, and it actually allows you to, visual planning matrix. It actually allows you to plan visually. And I'll show you a particularly good use case for this. But so for example, if I wanted to come in here and I wanted to change these numbers, I can just drag it down. So I've reduced it from what was 2K to 1K, and the total's been affected for June for order quantity. What I can also do is I can lock the total. So I've locked the total now at 23.7K. And assuming this full year hasn't happened yet, if I change this 2K up, you'll see that the other numbers change proportionally to maintain the total exists. So this can be quite handy in visual situations. Again, it works as a PowerPoint slide. So if you want to have a PowerPoint slide where you have some drivers that are affected by some inputs, you can then create those structure and actually change them in real time and see the changes. One more thing before I wrap up. I just want to touch on this audit trail, which I keep mentioning. So it's actually just another SQL database called olap.log, and it's financial planning. It actually registers every time any change is made by a user, whether that's editing a table, whether that's changing a status, changing a comment, or entering a value. It's all logged in this table, which shows a timestamp of when the change occurred, who made the change, what the change looked like, and the detail behind it, I think. All right, well, the change log's not going to load now, but there is a change log, and it does include all the details. I haven't made any changes here today, so maybe there's nothing logged, but it'll all be saved here. So the user, the date, the status, the module, the operation, and we're rolling out undo functionality this year. so that you'll actually be able to roll back changes that have occurred. In the meantime, it's very easy by carrying out sensible scenario management. So by having different scenarios for different users and with the right permissions, to be able to use scenarios for maintaining history. So if you're reforecasting, for example, you've got an approved budget, you simply create a copy of the scenario, you lock the previous scenario, and if the user's making any changes and they mess up a particular area, you can copy the data set that is being compromised or has been changed as not desired from the previous version. So it's very easy to create archives as you go. And again, you can create rules and structures around these so that they're not visible typically to the users, but they are available if you do need to be able to restore data from them or to go back to a point in time. Also, with SQL Server functionality, you can actually roll back to any given point in time if you really need to. Again, all of that log is kept there. You can roll back to a certain point in time. You can then restore the database from that point in time, and then you can copy the relevant data area across. So you're not overwriting everyone's changes. You're just going back to a point in time, finding the data set that you want, and rolling it forward. So that's probably a more technical session that we'd like to get in, but I wanted to cover a bunch of the areas: how you create the model, how you create the visuals, how you can capture input, and what some of the functionality looks like. If you've got any more questions or if you're interested in a trial, have a chat to me. We can get you set up with that, have a look at your data set, and work out how it might work for you. Otherwise, if there's any other questions, again, please just reach out to me. But hopefully some of what I took you through, from how to plan and report in Power BI from a financial planning perspective, resonated and was helpful.